Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have someone special today. His name is David H Rosemarin, aka Rosmarin. He's a Harvard psychologist, founder at Center for Anxiety. He's also a public speaker and author of Thriving with Anxiety: 9 Tools to Make Your Anxiety Work for You. HarperCollins, published in October 17th, 2023. So that wasn't long ago, David. I'm gonna read that one. We're gonna talk about anxiety, success, psychology, mental health, and spirituality today. Dave is in New York, and I am in Oaxaca, Mexico. This one is presented to you by podpire.com. If you want to start, scale, be invited to podcast, monetize your pod, you can go to podpire.com. David, I'm glad to have you on. Tell me a bit more about yourself, the Center for Anxiety, and everything you've been up to lately.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Center for Anxiety is pretty busy. We got offices in New York, in the Boston area, Cambridge, and now in Princeton, New Jersey. And as you know, anxiety is all the rage. Everyone's got anxiety. The anxiety epidemic is real. A lot of people are really struggling. And so much so that in addition to helping our patients, I wanted to write this book, which is really for the general public. Some perspectives on anxiety that run a little bit counter to some of the things that are commonly thought.
Why is everyone so anxious nowadays?
That's a good question, and it's one that I do cover in the book. Briefly, I think we've turned anxiety into something that we hate, something that makes us anxious, as opposed to understanding that it's part of life. Let me ask you a question. You ever get anxious down there in Mexico?
Yes,
Of course, everybody
quarterly,
does.
quarterly.
Do you say quarterly?
Yeah, I worked on my mind a lot, a lot. But like lately, okay, for example, in January, my sales cycles, they were stretched, meaning that clients took a while to pay me. And then the money demon surfaced, or the money
Sure.
trauma. It's like, hey, when are they gonna pay you? What if you have this, you have that? And I constantly need to put it down. I understand it's not me, that I'm not my thoughts, so quite advanced on the mindset side of things, but it's still annoying, and that brings anxiety, that spikes my cortisol a little bit.
I like that you said it was annoying, and I think that that's very common these days. When we're anxious, we're like, that's annoying. I shouldn't feel bad. I'm supposed to feel good all the time. I'm supposed to be happy. I'm supposed to be smiling. I'm supposed to look good. And I'm certainly not supposed to feel these heart palpitations or the shortness of breath or any of these other ubiquitous symptoms of anxiety. The fact that we perceive it as annoying and we get upset about it is exactly what makes us feel so anxious, as opposed to understanding that if you're a human being, you will feel uncomfortably anxious at times. That is part of the human condition. No matter if things are going great in your life, and certainly if they're not going great, you're going to feel anxious. It's just part of who we are as a species. And once we accept that, it actually can become a benefit.
Right. It's like this fight or flight. And in my case, it's never flight, because I'm this man, and it's like fight or fight. So it's like every outlet that I can find to externalize this internal energy, I'll do it. In my case, sometimes, unfortunately, it's Twitter. So if you go see on my feed, you'll see some mid-toxic stuff, some anger, some testosterone there.
Got it.
Fortunately, I have some systems in my life. For example, running with the dogs or looking at the stars at night. So I think most humans, they like that. And also in a big city like New York, there's always noise, movement, and it's so like artificial, quote unquote. So people must be pressure cookers there.
Yeah, the stress definitely adds to the anxiety. I think that's a good point. If you're going to take the time to recalibrate, to rebalance, to look up at the stars as you did, look off, into the distance. Take a walk around Central Park, though, as you have in New York, or around any of the areas surrounding Boston. There's certainly my point is that people do have those opportunities. The question is, are you going to take them? And often when we feel anxious, we try to get rid of our anxiety by just working harder, as opposed to actually taking the time to, like, okay, maybe I need to take a bit of a breather here and lean into the feelings, understand them. There's nothing wrong with me. It's just, this is part of what I'm going through right now.
Yeah, and trust in life. I feel sometimes a lot of humans, we've been taught that like IQ is pretty much everything and that you always need to solve, especially as men, I feel it's always like have a solution for this, have a solution for that. While sometimes it's just sort of wait on the cycle or being stoic and just waiting a bit more and doing everything in your power instead of just stressing, you know? So me, instead of waiting for these lines to pay, for example, is to do productive stuff, whether that's working, whether that's cooking, cleaning, whether that's sleeping, you know, or doing some sports. What do you think about stoicism?
I like what you're saying in one respect, that people often fight their anxiety. And the minute you fight your anxiety, you lose. Because if you're having the fight or flight system flaring up, you're having adrenaline going to your blood. The minute you start fighting against that, you're going to increase the flow of adrenaline. So you're just going to make the bad things worse. There is a certain stoicism which makes sense, which is I'm going to stay the course of what I want to do, even if it makes me feel anxious. Because this is what I'm here to do. I have my job. I want to do this. This is what my values tell me to do. And I'm going to persist on it through my anxiety. So the stoicism on the one hand is great. On the other hand, though, there is a flip side, which is where somebody's like, I don't feel anxious. But like, yeah, you do. You're uncomfortable. You don't want to talk about it. You're trying to avoid it by sort of remaining numb to it. So I think that the stoicism can be potentially a double-edged sword. If you stay on the good edge of it, though, sure, can create a lot of resilience and a lot of good stuff. Sounds like that's what you're doing.
Yeah, some fluidity. I could use a bit more fluidity and be a bit more talkative with my wife, for example. I tend to go the man route, you know. And sometimes that work, you know, just going in the mountain here and crunching these kilometers by myself, changing my own brain chemistry. Sometimes it takes a bit more time too. It can take like an hour 30 to get off that anger, you know. But yeah, I'm patient with myself. I don't torture myself too much. I want to talk about you, David. Your move from academics to business in 2011. Smooth, uh, how smooth selling was that?
Not at all. Oh my God. And firstly, I didn't quite leave academics. I've always sort of kept a footprint in the academic world, and I keep my academic affiliation to this day. But oh man, did that not prepare me in any way, shape, or form for the business world to be able to launch and deploy an operation in a different city. I mean, even to this day, it's daunting and very challenging for me. I'm much more of a natural academic thinker, so to speak, clinician, consultant, that's really my wheelhouse. Yeah, and that made me totally, anxious in many ways, and taught me a lot about myself.
So how did you navigate that?
Well, on the one hand, it was a good opportunity for me to get out of my comfort zone and to recognize that when you're doing something that you believe in and you want to do, and you don't have the skills because you've never been trained in it, you're going to feel stressed out, anxious. You're going to be a mess, and that's fine. I had to accept that about myself, which was humbling and challenging and an amazing learning experience that I certainly look back on. It also taught me that there are certain things that I like to do, and there's certain things that I just don't like to do.
What do you like doing? What you don't like doing?
I like the clinical side of things. I like creating systems that are going to help clinicians to help individuals with anxiety and other issues. I like writing. I love writing. I love speaking. I'm having fun during this conversation, definitely. But in terms of the business operations, that's the kind of thing that I really love working with business operators. And I can speak their language now and I understand it because trial by fire kind of crystallized a couple of things for me. But I also learned that you don't have to take every opportunity that comes your way in your life. And in business or in professional work, it's much more important to figure out who you are and what your real strengths are. Do that, and there's nothing else. Nothing will stop you.
So how can you put capitalism to the service of a social enterprise or like making more humans feel better at scale with that money?
Um, there are healthcare businesses all over the world, and the United States is chock full of them. And psychotherapy is no different than anything else. I mean, the margins are not massive. I'd say, a good margin in the psychotherapy business is going to be in the 10 to 20% range. And that's, it's not in the non-for-profit world of 5 to 7%, but it's also not in the tech or the finance world, which could be 40 to 60%. These are values driven businesses, and there is potentially less money than people in entertainment or in finance or another thing, but at the same time it's a services business. They're very tax efficient. You got to get 100% depreciation when you grow your company, because it's all an ordinary business expense as opposed to a capital expense typically. So there's that advantage. And there's also the social value of just adding things to people's lives and having that feedback. It's a reputation-based business, which is also can grow on itself over time, reducing certain costs. So there's certainly some ways to have a scalable social value business, which is also profitable, if you're willing to do that.
Well, it's certainly a growing niche. As we mentioned when we started, I was getting more at, you have around 6 or 7 clinics right now. How could you scale that to 100, or is that even a goal of yours?
I would love to do that with a institutional or a private equity partner. That's certainly beyond my skill level in business. Even managing the current roster of 60 to 70 people is daunting for me. It's actually overwhelming at times because it's not really my area. But there's a good business model, and there's certainly opportunity to invite that. Um, I think our brand is great. I think our reputation is great. I think most importantly, our clinical services are top notch. Patients who come in, our data is fantastic. We have patients who come in 7, 8, 10 sessions later, they've gone from moderate or high levels of anxiety down to mild. They're not, sometimes they're coming in with more serious concerns like suicidality, or they're injuring themselves and harming themselves, and they're stopping that within a couple of months of being with our service. So that gives me a lot of hope, and also just my clinicians are just best in class. So I'm very happy with the work that we're doing, and I think that business follows that quality.
How's telehealth played for you so far?
How is telehealth? Good question. So during the pandemic, we had this change on a dime, right? We went from 80% in office, 90% in office to 100% telehealth in 2 weeks. And people still use that as a convenient way of connecting with their therapist, whether it's on a weekly basis or more frequently or less frequently. Often people will come in person for their first session or for the first month of services, and we recommend that. But beyond that, we're certainly happy to provide telehealth. The clinicians like coming to the office. They have the camaraderie of their colleagues and supervisors, and snacks and nice, centrally located nice offices. But many of our patients, and I'd say it's still about 80% of our patients our meetings rather are by remote, which is quite remarkable.
You know what company I would start, David? I would sell couches to therapists or and chairs, and these would be smart couches and chairs, and you could monitor on a screen your patient's heartbeat and respiration and other data pieces. Would you invest in that one?
I think it's an interesting idea, a little bit of biological measurement integrated into a couch. I'd like to see a proof of
Massage,
concept.
heat, like
There you go. Music a little, maybe some
yeah,
headphones.
music,
There you go.
all the good stuff. Now, BetterHelp, that is, what do you think about that company, and would you get into the tech side of mental health?
Yeah, good question. I know less about that company in particular, but I'll tell you broadly, tech companies don't usually understand boots on the ground, high quality mental health care. The problem is high quality mental health services are usually not familiar enough with the tech side to be able to integrate and really leverage that clinical knowledge in a large way. What's great about tech is you can have 50 million people signing up in a matter of months with the right marketing, if you can scale it very quickly. It's hard to do that with brick and mortar offices and hiring high quality clinicians. I would love to see where this goes. And I do envision a future for our service, and whether we're a platform or someone else, to be able to deploy a high value add app, for example, for scheduling, for monitoring, maybe even an AI component to help with diagnostics or to help with recording sessions and giving clinicians tips on what exactly to focus on during those sessions or what could be optimized. How to recognize if a patient or a client is spending too much time on their phone after 2 a.m. and then there's a risk factor, which we know from the data. So for their suicide or for depression or whatever it's going on, or they're eating too much. I think there's so many ways to leverage technology that are not being done. But I don't think the tech companies are able yet to really understand what it means to take care of patients in a high quality way.
What are you researching nowadays? What is fascinating you about anxiety nowadays?
There's a lot of things, with the Thriving with Anxiety book, I've really been focused on public education and how mental health education for corporations, for example. So I'm doing some consulting for a couple of Fortune 500 groups and also doing some speaking for them. There's certainly a demand among HR groups to help educate and also retain high quality staff. I've seen a lot of people in the C-suite who struggle, and their kids are struggling, and their spouses are struggling, and those are really I think high value add consultations that I've done, because they not only help the individual and their family, but they also help the company. And becoming a mental health consultant and a mental health educator, that's really a new area in clinical psychology that I'm starting to sort of move into and study at an academic level.
Have you studied the anxiety that 9/11 brought to New Yorkers?
It's a good question. I have a student who's been doing research in that area and also on first responders, because it wasn't only not only the general public, but also specifically the people who were there, who responded to that and their families. So that is that's definitely an area of interest.
About Israel and Hamas, have you studied the effects on Israelis and Jews and Palestinians around the world?
Yeah, as a Jewish psychologist, it's a question I get a lot, especially today. What's really fascinating about it, from what I've seen, is that aside from the acute effects of the current crisis and the current war, in general, individuals in that region tend to have less anxiety than Americans, which is fascinating. And part of the reason is because of the social structure. It's much less individualistic. There's a lot more of a collectivistic culture. The people are there for each other.
Yeah, you're talking about Israelis, right? Because Palestinians probably like very high levels. Israelis that you speak about the kibbutz and these tight-knit communities, right?
I mean, no, there's also much more collectivistic culture in among Palestinians and Muslims in neighboring Muslim countries than there's compared to the United States. We are hopelessly individualistic. I mean, our people move right away from family in a hot minute and spread around the country with their siblings. I mean, that's much more rare in Muslim countries as well. But for sure, it is true in Israel. In addition, of course.
Because my understanding in Palestine was that, yeah, most they're under not necessarily a reign of terror, but they definitely don't want to speak up to who's in power. And yeah, they're sort of in an open air prison, especially in Gaza. So that rings to me low quality of life and anxiety.
Yeah, like I said, I'm looking at the region as a whole, and I think the current crisis and war in Gaza is obviously an exceptional situation, and any war-torn country or area of the world is going to be struggling during that crisis. But the baseline and in general, people are a lot more adaptive, I believe, in the Middle East due to cultural factors than we are here in the United States.
Yeah, that the Western world, yeah, the individualism. I'm not sure why we have got that way. Is it because of capitalism and just like look at me culture and always perform, perform? Are Europeans also that way? I believe they are, right? They're less family oriented.
To some degree less in the Mediterranean areas, but as you get more into Central Europe, Northern Europe, it certainly gets more into those types of cultures, and you see anxiety increasing as a result. Why? I have my theories. I think it's a great question. At the end of the day, I think it boils down to control. I don't know if it's capitalism as much as it is control. When people live in a society where they don't worship being in control all the time, they can let go of things and have better relationships with people and be a little more tolerant when things aren't going their way, which we kind of all need in order to get along with others, to be perfectly honest. Um, but I think that that's in some ways gotten lost from the American value system.
So are you saying like getting away from God in some sense? Because I'm in Mexico, right? And their religion is still prominent here. In my native Quebec, like we had enough of Catholicism and no one's religious, at least
Yes.
the white folks, you know. Um, in Mexico, it's still very prominent and family is really strong here, which I love about Mexico. So are you saying people that get away from God, which is sort of letting your sense of ego go in some sense, are less are more individualistic?
Um, for many people, they would use the language God and have more of a direct spiritual bent to it. And myself too, coming from that culture, like I'm comfortable with that. And I would say what you're saying is correct. Um, but the at the core of it though is if even in the absence of a belief in something greater, can we accept the limits of our control as humans? And I I do think that in spiritual societies, we are better able to do that because there's a priming of, well, I'm not supposed to be in control because there's some other being. But it's possible in a secular environment to nevertheless retain an awareness of the limits of our control and knowledge.
Deep because yeah, my wife she's still religious or lightly religious, and me, I always find it very difficult to believe in a God and
Sure.
just outsource my thinking and my faith to God. Also, I've struggled with making like a community, a physical community here. Um, I'm all the rage when it comes to online communities with other CEOs and founders, but when it comes to physical stuff here, it's still something I'm working on. And yeah, I'm gonna need to work on that. Dave, I know you need to run. Where can people find out more about you?
Sure. Author's website's probably the best place, which is DH Rosmarin, my last name, ROSMARIN.com. I love it when people reach out. I have a free giveaway. People can download a 12-page full color guide based on my new book, Thriving with Anxiety. And especially people from the corporate world. I love to hear from business leaders, people who have companies, because anxiety is the kind of thing that's really impacting um, not only individuals and their families, but also the corporate world and companies. And that's definitely an area of focus of mine, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have a chat with you today.